So I was just gonna work on a poem. Most of the poems that I posted on YouTube, they just kind of happened one night within about 25 minutes. I didn't really save them and work at them. I mean, maybe there's one or two that I had written and uploaded to my blog a couple years ago, and never made a video for them, and then just recently went back and did that. But most of them I just wrote that night in like a half hour, not really knowing where it's coming from or attempting to design it in any way. It just sort of happens. And I was just trying to do that, but then I kind of realized, I'm not really, I guess the poetry is mine, but what I've been doing so far is actually just stealing other people's music to put behind it, which sort of, I don't know, maybe that's cheating. Or maybe I'm a repairman. I take songs and make them better. Or okay, maybe not better, maybe just more pleasing to some ears. Or maybe I'm just making my poetry more pleasing by playing really awesome music behind it. But instead of actually writing that poem, I decided just to make a video to talk about what I just said, I guess. And also, I've got a lot of thoughts right now about the thread I've been participating in over on PZ Myers' blog. I think we're up to about 450 posts now. I've probably posted 15 or 20 or 25 even posts, most of them pretty long. So I'm tired in one sense. I'm not as excited now after 3 days of this, of writing my next response. But it's interesting to, because what I'm really doing is going into a community of bloggers with a very scientific, rationalistic, and skeptical sort of discourse. And I'm going in there with, well, I'll tell you what I've been called sort of a woo-woo, new age, mystical ineffabilist. Phantasmagorical hasn't come up yet, but that's just because none of these people have seen me on YouTube before. But I'm presenting them basically with, as a response to a materialistic scientism, which is, I think it would be fair to qualify most of the people who are reacting to my other metaphysical assumptions, like, I call them assumptions. I think our metaphysics can be based on more than assumptions. I think actually science is what I would say we should all be doing. It's just that I define science as a method, and it seems that a more rationalistic, materialistic, scientistic person would say that no, science is a body of truth. And see, I wouldn't necessarily want to deny that either. It's just, for me, truth is also, it shares in goodness and beauty. In other words, science is not immune from, its socio-historical context. Science is a cultural activity. It's always influenced by economics, by politics, by religion, by day-to-day life, by literature, by war. I mean, the military-industrial complex is difficult to separate science from, especially in the modern era, in the era since World War II, say. Because at that point, the funding for science became so wedded to what governments needed to know in order to better control their world, or at least their country, their people, and to defeat other countries in technological warfare. Science has been so closely wedded to this that it's difficult to say, okay, is science still a body of objective truth that's somehow above all the other sorts of cultural meaning that we share with one another? My basic position would be to say no, it's not. Science is a very valuable cultural activity that doesn't give us objective knowledge. it gives us a certain, it answers the empirical questions that we ask of it, because it's a method. It's a body of knowledge in progress. Science is a way of knowing an activity. It's not, I would rather not think of it as a fixed set of facts and laws which are incontrovertibly true in some objective sense about nature, especially when we want to say that one of those laws is materialism. Because most of the people in this forum or under P.Z. Myers' blog are saying that science is equivalent to materialism. And again, if science is a method, as I would suggest, an activity, a cultural activity, a way of knowing, then it wouldn't be, science wouldn't be dogmatic, because it would be constantly in process. And I know all of the people I'm talking to would admit that, oh, well, yeah, of course, science is a work in progress. But I guess what we're disagreeing about is the fact that scientific facts still require interpretations that science, that empirical measurement can't provide. An example of this is, I've talked about gravity before, I've been talking about entropy with people in this forum, and there's a tendency for them to think that entropy, described as a probabilistic occurrence, that we can mathematically or at least statistically predict, they think that that is an explanation for this sort of thing, for the arrow of time. And I would say no, it's a mathematical description. If we want to explain this, I'm saying things like, well, energy and matter want to complexify. Entropy is usually thought of as the reverse of complexification. It's a tendency toward disorder, toward heat death. It seems that energy in a closed system is inevitably lost, and so the system dies. But the thing is, though, this is sort of an abstraction. When you consider entropy in nature itself, all the systems are open systems. So it's difficult to distinguish in nature between life and death, because every death is creative in the real world. The intellect tries to understand this and starts asking the question, how does something come from nothing? Nature doesn't need a solution to this question, because nature is the answer. We are life and death at once. I mean, literally, the passage of time and the evolution, the biological evolution which has taken place over that time, has changed us only because of death. Or at least, this would be the Darwinian argument, that death is the natural selector. And you see, I've said only because of death. Well, but you should take that into the context of what I had said just earlier, that death is always also life in nature. It's only abstractly that we intellectually create this problem of, how can life and death coexist? How can something come from nothing? The truth is, you can't have one without the other. And so the Darwinian explanation isn't an explanation at all. It's half of the story, because there's also creation. There's not just death and destruction. There's creativity. There's intelligence. There's adaptability and autonomy. And I guess, I want to argue that teleology is fundamental to nature. And that human purposes and meanings are a further expression of that originally natural telos. And, most every scientific materialist wants to say that, no, you're just projecting your own human wishes and beliefs onto a mechanical purposeless, mindless world. And my usual response is to say, well, aren't you being a bit anthropocentric? Which is to say that you're assuming that the only meaning that can exist in the entire universe is lodged inside the human skull. It weighs 3 pounds. It's completely insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But you're saying somehow this significance inside here is completely separate from what created it and what still surrounds it and what it's embedded in. So, to level the charge of anthropomorphism, or really anthropocentrism, so, maybe I take back what I just said, it's, when you consider the anthropic principle in cosmology, it's that's the point, that we can't avoid doing these things, because this is a universe which created us. So our thoughts about it are necessarily creations of this universe. This can, you still have to interpret that for yourself. I can explain it in other ways, like that, to even try to conceive of a universe without intelligence for a being created by a universe of intelligence, that's impossible. And so we're in a very peculiar situation. And I think what it tells us is that, actually it's the universe that's anthropomorphic. Evolution moves toward the human form. Or at least it has this time. And, we can imagine intellectually the possibility of other universes that were, random and didn't lead to anything like us. But the thing is, that's a hypothetical abstraction. It's a mere possibility that can't be tested or confirmed in any way we can currently conceive. So we've got to deal with this universe. And we've observed much of it. There's obviously remaining mysteries. Even, the most materialistic scientist will say, look, most of the big questions I can only answer with, I don't know. It's as mysterious to you as it is to me. Richard Feynman says this. Richard Dawkins says this. I'm sure Daniel Dennett would say this, though I can't remember a specific instance. Douglas Hofstadter says this. There are a lot of materialists who acknowledge mystery. It's just that they're skeptical of the idea of it being for a reason. But they have this sort of covert dualism, because they'll obviously, every scientist, say Daniel Dennett, or philosopher, materialist, because materialism is philosophy, it's not science, which again is a method. Any materialist will say, of course, that there are human morals, human purposes, human reason, human consciousness, but they'll say that, no, nature is mindless. And so there's the covert dualism right there. I would say that, we've got to begin with our actual experience, which is, as human beings, in moral situations with each other, and with our earth, with the life systems, with the rest of the living community. We're in moral relationships with the whole world. And science doesn't somehow extricate itself from that situation. Every scientist is coping with a living, breathing universe that gave birth to them, that hopefully nurtures them, provides them with opportunities to express themselves, and then swallows them up again. All of us are in that situation. And under those conditions of being so finite and fragile, objective knowledge, in the sense that, a materialist will say, I may not know everything, but I do know some things, and they're true forever no matter what you say. There's no interpretation required. That kind of attitude, I think, neglects the finitude of the human situation, and therefore human cognition, that we are essentially bodies, organisms, not these disembodied egos with this capability of having perfect representations or some kind of logical map of the way some sort of separate pre-existing external world looks like. So we're actually embedded in this world, and in those circumstances, anything we attempt to know about it will have involved some sort of a posturing on our part, which has involved us with what we were trying to know in a transformative event. For example, in experimental physics, when they're building these particle accelerators and these lasers and mirrors, and what they're doing is manipulating technologically the way nature was in itself in order to know something that they think or assume is objective about it. But the thing is, they've gone in with all of this technological arm twisting, getting energy, getting light to shoot out in a perfect laser beam, and then these elaborate mirror mazes. We're literally trapping nature. And I'm not saying the results aren't somehow astonishing, but I'm saying we are asking questions with our symbolic, technological measure. We want to measure something, and what is the ultimate basis of any of our measurements? It's cultural convention, right? I would say, again, though, that culture is grounded in nature, so our cultural expressions are natural in that sense. But as experimental physicists building these elaborate experiments, we're not learning something that we didn't put there. As the quantum physicist Sir Arthur Eddington said, it's as though we're stocking the pond with fish before we cast our lines. And so nature can't reveal objective knowledge when you have to measure it, because the measurement changes nature. And this is profound. It doesn't mean that the human being can move things with their mind, or that the wave function isn't collapsed until I turn around and look at the rest of the room. No, nature collapses itself because human beings aren't the only observers. Experience permeates everything, and so it's all being looked at. It's all being felt by itself. It doesn't need to exist in a state of superposition before a human observer looks at it. So, I don't disagree with the materialist that there is truth. I just think truth is good and beautiful, and beauty is true and good, and goodness is true and beautiful. All of these things are inextricably linked, and to say that somehow truth should be our exclusive guide to life, scientific truth at least, in and of itself, I think is naive. And to even think that whatever we think our truths are somehow don't automatically influence what our sense of beauty or morality then becomes. Obviously these are related, and I think that's part of what someone like P.Z. Myers is trying to do by saying that, look, science is atheistic, you public. And I agree. If people aren't able to take that perspective in order to perform the scientific method, then they're missing out on a valuable kind of knowledge about the world. But I don't think this means, though, that atheism, or the recognition that sometimes you have to take responsibility for your own existence, you can't pawn it off on some external entity in the sky. I think we do have to acknowledge that we have to take responsibility sometimes, but I don't think that then implies a sort of materialism where non-human nature is mechanical and purposeless. I think our moral compulsions are natural. Our scientific desires and attitudes are natural. It's an expression of the universe trying to know itself because it wants to. So that's my perspective, and I'm sure I know there are billions of others out there, so reflect them back at me. Thanks for listening.